All right, so one of the things out there that I am most concerned about is how the whole world seems to be getting disrupted. All the old is going away, and there's lots of new ways of doing things. You know, I've talked about this on the show before, especially when it comes to technology and the dangers that we have, or I should say the opportunities to find more success in it. Now, what we're going to talk about a little today goes a little bit beyond the hospitality industry, but in order to do it, I brought a former hotel industry champion on the blower with me, and that's Frits van Paasschen. And you might know him as the former CEO of Starwood Hotels and Resorts, and he's also worked with Coors and Disney and McKinsey and pretty much anyone that found branding really important. Frits, how are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the show, Glenn. Thank you for having me on.
Well, let me tell you, it's a pleasure to have you on this show. I really was a fan of what you did during your time at Starwood, and I think it really plays into what this book is all about, which incidentally is called The Disruptor's Feast, How to Avoid Being Devoured in Today's Rapidly Changing Global Economy. Of course, you can find it on Amazon and probably lots of other good places too, right, Frits?
That's right. The best place to get the book is on Amazon. I made the decision to self-publish, and it's available both in Kindle as well as hard copy form.
Excellent. And this book follows in the long line of guests that I like having on that I'm very jealous of because this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Now, when it comes to branding, I thought you were an amazing professional, really getting a lot of the brands at Starwood very focused and have a direct emotional connection with guests. And that's something that I think has been now pushed out without the rest of the hospitality industry. Before we get into the topic of the book itself, I'm curious to know a little bit about what your branding was like when you were working at Starwood to make sure that you did connect with that guest, which is so critical today.
Well, I had the good fortune of coming into Starwood, which had at the time, of course, 9 very strong brands. And so there's no better place to start than with brands that are already in a very good place. My belief when managing brands is that they have to have a point of view, that at the very least they need to have a strong personality. One of the things that I carried from my Nike days was the idea that if you have a brand, it doesn't mean that everybody likes you. What it means is some people love you, and maybe a few people really don't, and that's okay. You have to have a point of view as a brand, and so we wanted to make sure that we were as sharp as we could be in defining what each of the 9 brands stood for.
And that's a really great thing, because if you try to appeal to everybody, I think, Frits, then you wind up appealing to nobody, right?
I think you end up being generic and something that doesn't stand out, so you may not turn anybody off, but you probably don't have a loyal set of followers that will do anything, go the extra 15 minutes to get to your hotel, pay the higher rate, all the things that brand zealots will do if they love your brand.
Right. So what are some of the elements that make sure a brand is something that can be loved, or is it really a case of every brand has to go on its own path and journey?
Well, I think each brand, almost like a human being, has to have a personality and a positioning in the market that makes it both distinctive and compelling. And being able to define that in a short few words that really make it very clear what the brand stands for is one of the key things to do. Then the next piece of work, and this is really where the work is making sure that those aspects of that brand positioning come alive in your visual communications, what your web and online and mobile presence looks like, the design, the ethos, the feel when you come on property, the way associates interpret that personality and the brand for their own delivery of hospitality. All of those things really need to come together. I will tell you, I think what's challenging for the hospitality industry is it's a hugely capital-intensive business. I mean, after all, hotels are the real estate business. And as a result, getting each property lined up with each brand is what makes branding in the hospitality business so challenging.
Yeah, it absolutely is challenging. And I'm finding that as these companies continue to get bigger, and of course, you're very well aware that your former company at Starwood was purchased by Marriott, they now have 32 brands. And how do you continue to create brands that are distinct when there are so many in a family of products? Or is that even possible, Frits?
Well, I haven't looked hard at the brand portfolio of Marriott, but I think that when you have a lot of brands, it's very important that there are people in the organization that are singularly focused on a particular brand and what it stands for. Let's face it, there are far more than 32 brands in the hospitality business across lodging, and therefore there's no reason why one company couldn't have as many brands as they do. But the challenge is making sure that each one has a separate personality that is distinct in some way, that reaches out to a certain guest, and that each property and each associate that works with that property stays true to that positioning.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And I think one of the problems that we're seeing in general is a lack of stewardship over certain brands. And if you don't keep that laser light focus on it, I think in that case, then it starts to lose that connection with the guests. Now, one of the things that are going to make it a lot more difficult is the rapidly changing global economy, as you write about in the Disruptor's Feast, which is about digital technology, global development, urbanization, and business disruption, really changing the way that we operate in there and how brands fit in with those places. So everyone is disrupting. Here in the hospitality industry, we see disruptors in the form of companies like Airbnb, for example, that are really having the lunch of a lot of hoteliers out there. What was the premise for you creating this book, and why do you think it's such an important topic now?
Well, I think as you said so well, what's happening is the rise of power of digital technology is creating all kinds of other things around the world. So whether it's this rapid expansion of development, whether it's a catalyst for urbanization, technology is setting so many things in motion that, look, I'm a guy who spent his career on sneakers, suds, and sleep, right? I'm not a guy who grew up in the technology world, and yet it really reminds me of that line about Keynesians. We're all technologists now. Right. Technology is fundamentally changing every aspect of the way we live and the way businesses work. And, I had a unique vantage point as CEO of Starwood to see that with hotels in 100 countries, the capital that was behind those hotels, which was all over the world, the 250,000 people that slept in our hotels every night. So I had this wonderful vantage point to see how the world was changing and how that acceleration was creating new challenges, especially for large organizations that had been very successful for a long time. But it struck me that in a changing world, the new definition of insanity almost has to be doing the same thing and expecting the same result. Doing the same thing today may, in fact, give you a very different result tomorrow than it did yesterday.
So we've all got to be on our game and understand that disruption can come in most unlikely of places if we're not paying attention to it. So how do we, I want to know about some brands that you think are being disruptors and how they're changing the industry, but I'm also curious as to how you could guard yourself against being cast as irrelevant at some point. So tell me a little bit about some of the stuff that you talk about in the book and how disrupting the status quo is really starting to drive change.
Yeah, well, let me start back. First of all, I think if you look at the travel business and you look at the experiences that people have on the road, in spite of the hard work of the millions of people that work in this industry, and in spite of the technology, travel is still not a very pleasant experience, right? And one of the words I've used to describe it are anonymous, uncertain, and inconvenient, right? You are not an individual. You are seat 13C. You don't know exactly what activities you want to do when you go somewhere new because while there are millions of reviews, you don't know who's exactly like you. And there are lines and all kinds of inconveniences along the way. So there's a lot of room here for innovation that will change and improve the travel experience. And, the real first wave of digital disruption that now is really a huge part of the travel landscape, of course, is the rise of the OTAs.
Right.
And, they are extraordinarily powerful. And like any network-based businesses, they are largely natural monopolies. That's why there's this constant consolidation there. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the rise of Airbnb as an alternative way of delivering hospitality. But I think the real next phase here will be who actually creates a better way for you to plan and go through the process of traveling that makes it less inconvenient, less uncertain, and where you feel like you're actually a human being that every step of the way. And whether that's going to be Google, whether that's the travel services that Airbnb is starting to offer, whether it's the OTAs becoming more interactive, or whether it's any of thousands of startup companies, or for that matter, the hotel companies, it's still up in the air. I think that's still up for grabs.
So we don't really know what's going to happen. So I guess we have to gird ourselves as much as possible against those disruptors that could come into the market at any minute and reinvent the industry with something completely obvious that we somehow were blind to.
Yeah, and I think that the best business ideas are oftentimes a combination of not screamingly new technology, but the combination of a few good ideas and strong technologies which together create a new concept. And I think that will be a large basis for how this plays out.
Are there companies either in or outside the hospitality business that you think are following this particular model that you just laid out?
There's none that I think I'd like to point out in specific. I think that, the real interesting challenge will be, what does Google want to do in this space? What do companies like Apple and Microsoft want to do with all the information they have about different people and where they are? And it's the classic word I think that has come out of this that we're all familiar with now is frenemies, right? Are we competing with Google? Are they our partner? I mean, I think it's a really difficult question sometimes to answer, and yet it's extremely important from a strategic perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're finding is that they are your friends until suddenly they're not anymore, right?
Yeah, well, I think that, it's in life, in any situation, what you get depends a lot on the strength of your negotiating position. And so, for any company to maintain, the loyalty of their consumer base, to maintain some kind of proprietary access to what people want and to create a network around that creates the kind of barrier that you can use to adjust and change as the landscape shifts with new technology and disruption coming along.
So how do you know if a new technology has the potential to disrupt the business you're in, or it's just another fad that may come and go?
Well, I think that too often we make the mistake of dismissing disruptors, and some of that I think is a function of cognitive bias, which is one of the things that I talk about in the book. And another is this idea that most disruption starts kind of innocent. It doesn't necessarily look very menacing. It might start down market. They may make a lot of mistakes, but when they get their act together, suddenly they grow very quickly, and usually at that point, it's too late. I mean, I think that, again, the interesting thing to do is to look at the strength of the OTAs as they've come into existence, and let's face it, much less than 2 decades, to be a major force in the industry. Had the hotel companies in 2000 say, no, all online bookings are going to come through my own channels, would they have been in a better position today to forestall the great strength of the OTAs? I think that's an example of how life could have played out differently if the hotel companies were awake to the challenge and the opportunity in the first internet bubble around the year 2000.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I remember that time period and how after 9/11, the hotel industry fell into a deep morass. So they gravitated towards the OTAs, thinking that this would be a short-term solution. Well, now we know better that it transformed the entire way that people connect and book hotels and really created a sense of commonality between all hotels for a lot of customers, where it became a commoditized product as opposed to an individualized, exciting experience. And I think the hotel brands are starting to learn that that's what they have to deliver now in order to stand out with customers.
Right, and I think you put your finger on the critical issue here, because as the hotel companies see that the signaling power of brands has gotten weaker through online reviews and all the transparency that there is, as hotel owners have said, hey, I actually want to manage this hotel because I want to have flexibility, in many respects, hotel companies and OTAs are in direct competition as pipelines of guests to hotels.
Yeah.
The OTAs have these extraordinary networks. I mean, if you look at Booking.com, they have 1 million different properties online, compared to 1 million rooms with Marriott. So they're much larger. But what the hotel companies can, and in my opinion should do, is make sure that the on-property experience is connected to how people have gotten to that hotel and create loyalty to a system. That was why when I was at Starwood, I was so focused on SPG, because ultimately that was the brand that was the underlying strength for each of the individual hotel brands that we had above it.
And I will tell you, no matter where I go, when people are discussing loyalty programs, if they're an SPG member, they are much, much, much more loyal than any other program I've seen in the business. So I want to congratulate you on creating something that really resonates with that core customer that you were looking for.
Well, thank you. And by the way, back to the logic.
Yeah.
The ability to have that loyalty was what gave us the opportunity to have conversations with hotel owners about why they should sign with us and not somebody else. And so the hard work that so many people put in to build that loyalty around SPG was an extraordinarily important asset to the company.
Yeah, and I think a lot of other loyalty programs are trying to chase what you achieved years and years ago. Now, there's one company out there that is a great disruptor that I think really, visualizes everything that we're talking about here today, and that happens to be Uber, something I absolutely love. When I went out to the America's Lodging Investment Summit in January, just a few short weeks ago, what struck me most is me and all of the hotel industry people standing at the Uber pickup stand and nobody over at the cab stand. So, that's something that really connects best with us, and I think should serve as a warning to the hotel industry that if we're going to enjoy Disruptor so much, maybe the hotel industry is ripe for disruption as well.
Well, and to your exact point, think about it. When you got into a cab, you were anonymous. You had no idea what the cab driver was going to be like. It was not convenient in the sense that you had to stand and wait, and you had no way of knowing how long a cab would take or whether you'd get a good driver. Uber solved those basic problems, and to your exact point, that's all it took for a major shift in the way people think about getting themselves around in cities away from home. And, even to the point where, and I mentioned this in the book, that if you look at San Francisco, one of the things the Uber guys told me was their business in San Francisco is 3 times as big as what the taxi business was when they got started. So they've created primary demand. They've touched, and frankly, they're disrupting car rentals as much as they are the taxi business, and for that matter, car ownership. So, that's the interesting thing about disruption is it doesn't necessarily stay in its lane. It starts to spread into other businesses and create a different way for people to think about getting the services that they want.
Right, and completely anecdotal, I'm going to bet that DUIs have gone down and accidents have gone down that were related to alcohol as well. Because I know my friends in Las Vegas, for example, that live on the outskirts of town, constantly take Ubers now where they used to drive and take chances before.
Are you saying they were drinking before?
I'm just saying that sometimes when, you're on the line, you're going to probably go for the drive instead of,
well, I think
but now they don't even consider it because they take an Uber both ways.
But all kidding aside, right? I think Uber also makes the taxi experience feel safer because you do have a sense that there's another individual there and that someone is watching.
Yeah. And tell you what, they're all really nice and I get along with them. And here's the magic word that we all say, it creates an experience, right? It's a real immersion that's different than the cab thing where I don't really feel part of it. I almost feel like I'm invading the cabbie's privacy and listening into his personal telephone conversations in Hindu or Pakistani, it seems like all the time.
Well, and Glenn, I think you raise another important point here because literally the staffing ratio has changed, it stayed exactly the same, right? You have one driver and you have however many people in the car as before.
Right.
And ultimately your sense of that experience and of hospitality comes down to human beings. And so technology has done something to make hospitality better, but it hasn't taken people and the human aspect of hospitality out of the equation.
Right. So how do we prepare ourselves for this bright and exciting but potentially disruptive future?
Well, I think businesses, of course, have to start to think about how they develop peripheral vision, right? How do you, as a business leader, understand what's happening in not just technology, but also in different parts of the world? And what's happening across generations. And, one of the things I talk about and I feel very passionate about is this idea of living at the crossroads.
Right.
And understanding and bringing people together from different cultures, from different functional areas with different disciplines, people from the field, people from technology, people from marketing and design, but also across generations and bringing a crossrougds of the long experience that people have that is valuable in making any kind of decision and the judgment that goes along with that, with this sort of intuitive native understanding of a different world. And the confluence of those different points of view, I think, is the best insurance that people can have in understanding where their business needs to go. And then the other piece, of course, is focusing on a strategy that builds barriers to entry that are flexible and that can respond to what's happening in the rest of the world.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. And you said something earlier that you just touched on. We kind of glossed over it. You used the phrase confirmation bias, the idea of seeing things through your prism without necessarily accurately evaluating the situations. Any tips on how we could avoid confirmation bias to that would prevent us from making smarter decisions in business? Well,
I think, first of all, part of it comes with the understanding that bias is inherently human and that it's not a function of how smart you are. And, when people like the head of the Federal Reserve think that the financial crisis will be contained to the subprime housing industry, I mean, here's a guy who was extraordinarily smart and is as well informed as anybody could be. So the real question here isn't intelligence. It's making sure that you have the discipline and the mindset to continue to update your view of the world and to understand how different trend lines are changing the landscape. And I do think that's an effort that requires getting out. It's one of the reasons why, for example, I moved Starwood's headquarters to Shanghai for 6 weeks in 2011, and 2 years later did the same thing to Dubai, because getting that dialogue, hearing from people about what's happening, what people are asking for, what kind of developments there are in the marketplace, it's really, I think, a function of having the discipline to continue to be able to listen and not listening to the same people who are saying the same thing.
Right, and that makes me think of the hotel general manager who needs to get out from behind the desk, get out of that office, and talk to your customers and see what they're thinking, see what they want when it comes to the future of the hotel experience, and I think that will help you get past some of that bias as well.
Glenn, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because frankly, the lesson I learned at Starwood was, the very good hotel managers were out and around the property constantly. When I walked the property with them, they knew people's names, they knew what was going on in different parts of the hotel. And what I said to them was, my being with you is exactly the same thing as what you're doing. I just need to do this on a global basis and get to as many people and properties as I practically can in the context of my job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely right. Now, before we wrap up here, Frits, I do want to say you've got some great people who are totally into this book. You got quotes from Jim Cramer, who's the host of Mad Money and Squawk on the Street with CNBC. Everybody knows him. He's the guy that's shouting all of the things that you should be doing. But I'm also impressed with Arianna Huffington is all about this book as well. Now, the reason why I mention her is because I think the Huffington Post did a great job at disrupting the way that we think about news today and how it's delivered as well.
Absolutely. And I think that the insights and the development that HuffPost had in bringing news to people, sourcing from other places, is a great example of how the established world of newspapers was completely disrupted in a digital world. I mean, it used to be that Warren Buffett loved to buy newspapers because he saw them as small natural monopolies in different cities. That has been completely changed. And I was so excited when Arianna agreed to write an endorsement of my book, because I thought what she had done in the journalism business, in the newspaper business, was exactly the kind of thing that's happening industry after industry around the world. So I was thrilled that she was willing to do that.
That's awesome. And again, we're talking about The Disruptor's Feast, how to avoid being devoured in today's rapidly changing global economy. Before I give you one more shameless plug, Frits, any final words?
Well, first of all, I guess I want to say I think that the hospitality business continues to be an extraordinarily exciting place to be. And I know so many people work in different aspects of the hospitality business. There will be a lot of change, but hospitality will always be about human beings serving and helping other human beings.
Great. And thank you for saying that, because you make me look like a smart guy, because I say that all the time. So myself and my ego, thank you for that one. Remember, guys, it's all about connecting as people. And I think that is a follow through, a through line for this whole conversation is no matter what technology is out there, meaningful personal interactions are what are going to connect with us best and make us want to use whatever product or service again and again. So make sure you get Frits van Paasschen's book. That's Frits, F-R-I-T-S, Van Paasschen, V-A-N-P-A-A-S-S-C-H-E-N. I got to tell you, it took me a little while to figure out how to spell your name. I had to correct it a lot when I was writing for the former magazine. And you guys can get that on Amazon.com. Any other things that you would like to add?
That's great. No, thank you so much. I'd love to hear people's reactions to the book.
I would too. And guys, send us your note. You can find me, Glenn, at rouse.media or on Twitter and Instagram at Traveling Glenn. And Frits, can they reach out directly to you through social media?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and FritzVanPaasschen.com as well.
Excellent. So guys, buy the book. It's really, really interesting stuff. And you know what? I really hope to figure it all out. And I want to thank you all for listening. And I will be back next week. That is, unless I find I've gotten disrupted and there's a whole new way of doing podcasts. See you guys next week. And thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for listening to No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast with your host, Glenn Hausman, online at rouse.media, on Twitter at Traveling Glenn, and on Facebook.com/Glenn.Hausman. We'll catch you next time.